I certainly acknowledge folks in Wisconsin, as well as at CDC and the University of Florida and Indiana University who influence the work that's presented to you today. And I thank you all for your time.
Thank you, Jeffrey, Dr. Jeffrey, sorry. Thank you for your talk. And I appreciate the evidence that you explicated here about homophobia and biphobia, but my concern, and I'm going to push you on your conceptual framework. So since people don't live in a single identity category at one time, right? So people don't just live sexuality identities or in sexual lives, they also live in racialized bodies, right? And you're talking about Black MSM. I'm wondering, does homophobia happen, or internalized homophobia or structural homophobia happen outside of race? Do any of these men articulate, or are you able to ascertain whether these men actually recognize that they live in Black bodies? And so therefore, since Black is, you don't wake up one morning and you're Black and tomorrow you're gay and not Black, you're always Black and gay, okay, or Black MSM. Is it not that the way in which homophobia is experienced, both structurally and individually, is in part a result of a convergence of race and racism, right, and sexuality and homophobia and heterosexism simultaneously? And so I'm wondering, how are you able to ascertain that if you only sort of ask about a single category of life as though it functions at the exclusion of another major category of life, race, and for these men, Blackness?
The way we address the conflation of both sexual orientation and race, which is very important when we study Black MSM, is by drawing on people like you, Dr. Bailey, who talk about the importance of understanding the unique experiences, identity-related experiences around race and sexual orientation for Black queer people. And here I draw upon theory, sociological theory that talks about the importance of intersectionality. And that this basically means that people don't live gay lives and just Black lives and poor lives and high SES lives, but we have to take into consideration all of their lives. And what we did during this investigation in Milwaukee is that we used a methodological framework that allowed us to capitalize on what we know from intersectional theory. And what basically that means that we did a mixed method study. We did a qualitative study in which we could conduct discourse analysis and really get an understanding of these men's lives from their own perspectives. So instead of us approaching the study by having specific questions about what we thought may be driving HIV risk, we asked them, what do you think is causing HIV to spread? What could have prevented you from becoming infected? And was it like for you to be a young MSM? And that way their stories were not, we had a clear understanding of their stories from their own perspectives. And in cultural analysis, we would say we took a more phenomenological approach. We wanted them to articulate what it meant. That's how we did it.
Yeah, three quick questions. When you mentioned the non-Black MSM in, I think you said the brother study, were those only Latino men, or were they white men as well? We said non-Black.
I need you to repeat that question.
That was the second study. That was the Milwaukee study. That was the Milwaukee study?
In the Milwaukee study, we examined both Black and non-Black MSM.
But was non-Black also including white, or was it just non-Black? I mean, because Latino could be non-Black.
Correct. In the third bullet on this slide, we had 18 Black and non-Black interviews. 14 of the men who we interviewed were Black. 2 were Latino and 2 were white.
Okay, okay. Next thing, the term MSM, men who have sex with men, do you think that would be, in referring to bisexual men, should we call them men who have sex with men, or do we give a certain credibility if we say you're bisexual, as opposed to just an MSM? And I don't know if you thought about this at all, but I'm just curious because we are caught between the gay versus same-gender loving versus bisexual versus MSM, and what we talk about caught between what term should we use now?
That's a very good question. And I'm not sure I have the answer on it. I think we certainly should be attentive to people's own identities for themselves, because how people identify themselves oftentimes it determines the extent to which we can reach them with any type of intervention that we seek to design for them.
And so on that note, did you notice a preference for the men to call themselves bisexual versus MSM?
Repeat that question?
So on that note, did you find a preference in the men calling themselves either MSM or bisexual, or what they call themselves?
In the Milwaukee investigation, most of the young men who we interviewed, of the 44 young HIV-infected MSM, most of them identified as gay. Mm-hmm. We had about a third of them who identified as bisexual. In the investigation, the last study that I highlighted related to bisexual men, these men were men who weren't not sampled with respect to their identities or risk behaviors, and about half of these bisexually active men identified as bisexual.
And my last question is, why were there no black men in that photo from Milwaukee, that poster?
Mm-hmm. I'm not sure of that. GayNeighbor.org designed that picture.
One last question. Here you go.
First of all, I really want to just thank you for the work that you've done. I think you really are making some inroads into an area that needs to be investigated. And one of the things that really struck me was how your preliminary findings seem to contradict some of the myths or perceptions that we hear about black men who have sex with men and women as a statement about their prowessness or their virility or their masculinity, and wondered if you could just respond to that in terms of, here you've got some data that counters that kind of view, but that's kind of, again, in terms of what we hear and seems to come out in the popular media.
And to make sure I'm hearing you correctly, you said my findings counter some other work regarding masculinity, and you said something else.
Well, with bisexual men, with what I saw on your slide, and apparently, from your data, these men are experiencing more, we could say, psychological trauma or more internalized phobias with regards to their sexual behavior, correct?
The literature would suggest.
No, in terms of your data, though. That's what I saw on your slide, when you did the comparison with the men who have sex with men and women and the men who have sex with men. The MSW, MSMW as compared to the MSM. Mm-hmm. And so it just seems to actually fly in the face as a contradiction to the perceptions of what seems to be out there as myths or perceptions about men who have sex with men and men who have sex with men and women. And that, again, the view and kind of the perception is that these guys, are more virile, are actually not experiencing any kind of phobias and thinking that, their behavior is actually validated as a way of their masculinity. And so that your data seems to run contrary to that view. And just wanted to get your thoughts on that.
I would argue that these data add to that view. I mean, my dear friend and colleague, Dr. David Malebranche, has done work extensively looking at masculinity-related and gender-related issues for Black MSM and MSMW. He'll be presenting some of those data at this conference. But I think when we think about stigma as a social determinant of health, and in particular, social determinant of HIV infection, sexual minority stigma, or homophobia or biphobia, is kind of like one arm of stigma that affects Black men broadly. I mean, racism certainly is a huge issue, but masculine prowess and masculinity-related issues are also very important, given the fact that racism has made us been demonized in this country for so long, and Black men indeed do oftentimes feel the need to respond by having more masculine behaviors or more risky behaviors. And these are certainly not tenets that are specific to Black men, but certainly it's just a different way of thinking about the data, I would argue. But I just drew upon bisexual theory to argue that that could be a reason why we see some higher levels of risk, as we see here, that are not explained by poverty. Because controlling for poverty wasn't the issue here. Controlling for poverty, we still see the effect of being bisexual upon risk. Thank you all for your time.